Hey guys, Miss Parnell back. I'm going to do sections 2 and 3 about the humanistic theory and trait theory of personality. Again, these aren't really slow for you to write, so if you want to write all the notes and then come back and watch or just pause it, however, but I was thinking most people already had the notes by this point, so that's why I don't really leave the time to watch. All right, so again, if you did this earlier, you probably have section 2 as humanistic and trait. I just ended up breaking it up and making 5 sections instead of 3. It doesn't matter. You don't have to change it. I got humanistic as 2 and then trait as 3. If you have humanistic and trait as 2, fine. Make sure you go watch the crash course 2. So watch that and then come back and do it. So, all right, the humanistic theory. So again, we talked about this some when we talked about therapy. So we talked about it at the beginning of the year in Unit 1. So hopefully you got like some idea about it. But by the 1960s, some personality psychologists were not happy with what was going on with psychoanalysis and even the psychodynamic theory that was coming about. They thought it was very bleak. It was just drives. It was just unconscious. It was conflicts. It was tension. It was all this stuff in your unconscious. You can't even get to it. You can't access it. You can't change it. And so they kind of thought it was more of a like wah wah, and so they wanted to do a more happy, basically, approach to psychology and stuff like that. And so B.F. Skinner's behavioral approach was really big at the time, and that was almost like you were a robot, like you were being controlled, you were being conditioned. These schedules of reinforcement were making you do stuff you didn't really have control. So they were coming up with something like if you can't access your unconscious, you can't control it. If you're just being conditioned and taught and learned, you're like a robot, you can't control it. So they wanted something like you make yourself and you're in charge of and you can control and all that. So the humanistic theories view personality with a focus on the potential for healthy personal growth. So they're all about you as the human. So that's kind of how you can remember this, got the word human in it, about you as the person and how you can like grow in your potential. So the main people here were Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers. We talked about Carl Rogers with therapy because remember he did that like client-centered, like active listening and client-centered approach and stuff like that. So Abraham Maslow, we're going to talk about a little bit more in the next part of this unit when we get to motivation and emotion because he was all about, he had his hierarchy of needs and how that motivates us. But they focus on basically how we strive for self-determination, self-growth. So again, like being the best you, okay? I think I've told you this before, and you can probably tell just by knowing me, like out of all the approaches we talk about, and none of them are right, none of them are wrong. It's just your view, like your lens in which you kind of look at the world, look at yourself, look at problems, want to solve stuff. And it's just kind of like your approach and your view to that. But probably out of all these, honestly, I'm probably most humanistic. Like I really like this one because I think like you can make yourself great. Like or you don't have to if you don't want to or don't care to or whatever. And like these things, I'm not really like driven. I'm not really looking at it like I'm being driven by my unconscious or I'm not really kind of controlled, looking at the like robotic stuff of behaviorism. But then again, I'm not a math person, right? I'm not an analytical person, stuff like that. Maybe someone who's more analytical mathy, that makes sense, more the learning stuff and the control and stuff like that. So it's kind of all where you're coming from. But when we talk about this one, this is the one that I kind of prescribe to the most. I think. So Maslow talks about self-actualization. That's the top of his pyramid. So we'll talk about that one, like I said, a little bit later. But basically, it's being your best you. Okay. So according to Maslow, it's one of the ultimate psychological needs that arises after all the basic ones have been met. So the bottom of his pyramid is like physical, which is like food, water, shelter, safety, stuff like that, a house, money, enough money to live, stuff like that. He's going to say, if you don't have those things, you're going to be caught up on them. Like you can't self-actualize because you're trying to figure out where your next meal is coming from or how you're going to get enough money to not be homeless or something like that. But he says, as you work up and you get all your needs met, then you get to the top and you meet your own last ultimate need. And it's like to fulfill your potential. Okay. And people do it in a bunch of different ways, right? Like you could look at it career-wise, like I feel, like this is it. I found the right career, this is my potential. I'm doing what I should be doing. I'm making a difference. You can look at it family-wise, you can look at it friend-wise, you can look at it big picture world-wise, like, philanthropists or, volunteers, people that are medics in the army, whatever. There's a bunch of different ways you can kind of like think of becoming like your best you, right? And becoming like self-actualized. And the other thing is Maslow and them, they study pretty healthy, creative people. They're not looking at troubled people, people with psychological disorders, people who need help, who have problems, they're not looking at all that, right? They're looking at like healthy, normal, creative people and like, why are you so awesome kind of thing. So this is one I always call like the sunshiny approach to psychology. So Carl Rogers pretty much agreed with Maslow on all those things. He thought we were primed from growth. He was a little bit more cynical maybe than Maslow, as in like your environment can ruin it. Like you can be primed for growth, but then if you're not in a supportive, loving environment, then maybe you're not going to be able to rise above it. Whereas Maslow would say, yes, you can, that type of thing. He proposed his person-centered approach. Remember, he talked about that client-centered therapy and stuff. And it stated that to promote growth, your climate has to be genuine, so real. You have to have acceptance. Remember, he talks about that unconditional positive regard with therapy and how you just have to genuinely accept someone the way they are. Like you don't change them, you just love them where they're at. And empathy. Empathy, remember, is like understanding. Sympathy is like feeling bad for someone, but if you empathize, you can like get in their shoes, see it from their point of view type thing. So just a reflection, just a reminder on that unconditional positive regard, according to Rogers, an attitude of total acceptance toward another person. He also talked about your self-concept and how important that was. And basically you need to figure out, who are you, right? The self-concept, who am I? It's all of our thoughts, all of our feelings about ourselves in answer to the question, who am I? What do I like? What do I not? What am I good at? What am I not? And you just kind of figure out, what will I tolerate? What will I not? What will I be around? What will I not? Deal breakers, goals, stuff like that. Rogers said, if our self-concept is positive, then we tend to see the world more positively. So if the who am I tends to be like, I'm this, I'm this, I'm this, I'm this, I'm this, and all those words are generally like good, positive words, then you tend to see the world more positively. He says if our self-concept is negative and you describe yourself and it's like this, 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 and this, and they're all like negative, bad words, then you tend to be more unhappy and see the world negatively. He also proposed this whole battle within us that I know I talked about a lot in honor psych and I've probably talked about with you guys, real self versus ideal self. So really, who are you right now? That's your real self. And who do you ideally want to be? So if you want to be a straight A student and you're being lazy and getting C's and D's, you have a battle within you and something's got to change. Okay. Ideally, you would want to just change your behavior, pull it up, do well, be an A student. Whoa, they match. But like that's a lot of work. You know what's a lot easier than changing your behavior? Because changing your behavior is work and it's hard. Changing your thoughts is not work and it's not hard. You just go, click, I magically change my thoughts. And instead of wanting to be a straight A student, I just say, I'm happy with C's and D's. And then again, well, you're at the same. So your ideal self doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be like the best. He would say like, if you want to be a bum living in your parents' basement at 40 years old and you're being a bum, living in your parents' basement at 40 years old, you probably don't have a lot of tension. It's the people who are being bums living in their parents' basement at 40 years old who want to be like successful living on their own. They have a lot of tension. And so something's got to give. You've either got to get yourself there or you got to change your thoughts and be happy with your real self and make that real self be an ideal self. And until those things line up, you're going to have tension. But as soon as those things line up, he says, it's kind of clear, you're coasting, like you're super happy. All right, trait theories. This is the third section, or if you had it together with section 2. So some researchers attempt to define personality in terms of stable and enduring behavior patterns, and those are your traits. So make sure you write down the definition for this. A trait, a characteristic pattern of behavior, or a disposition. A disposition's like kind of like a characteristic, like temperament's like your personality and stuff, and it kind of goes together. It's like a part of that. To feel and act as assessed by a self-reported inventory or peer reports. Basically, you fill out something and it figures out your traits, or someone else fills out something about you and figures out your traits. So starting with a guy named Gordon Allport, he discovered this and defined personality in terms of identifiable behavior patterns. He was less concerned with explaining them. He was more concerned with describing them. So like he didn't want to figure out the individual and explain it away like Freud and get to the unconscious and why. He didn't care about that. Actually, he kind of discovers this, as you'll read in your book, when he is interviewing Freud. He realizes like all the stuff Freud's saying is like not it for him, and it kind of spurs him in the opposite direction. And he just wants to describe the person. I don't care to know why you're like that. Let's just say what you're like, like describe your personality. And so he kind of gets the ball rolling on this theory. 2 ladies, Isabel Briggs Myers and her mother, Catherine Briggs. So her maiden name was Briggs, but she got married and it was Myers. So it's called the Myers-Briggs. These 2 ladies created the Myers-Briggs personality inventory, which is a pretty famous personality inventory. So it's called the MBTI, the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, and it uses 126 questions and the questions have like an A or B answer. So you like finish the sentence. It's not true or false or agree, disagree. It's like finishing the sentence. Like when I'm doing my work, I like to, and it'll be like A, be alone, or C, be around other people, stuff like that. It's questions like that. And so there's 126 of them. And when you get done, it sorts you into 16 different categories, which you can see I got 16 boxes here. And so it's 4 letters. So it's like I or E is the first one. And then N or S is the second one. T or F is the third one. And J or P is the fourth one. So since there's 4 like levels of this or that, it makes for 16 possible scenarios. And it kind of was based on Carl Jung's personality types is where they get it from. And so if we were in class, we would be doing this and talking about them. I'm going to try and put some links up, maybe like after the exam. It's nothing to worry about now, but it's pretty interesting if you want to do it. They're usually considered so dead on. So for instance, I'm an ENFP. And if you look right here in ENFP, it says the campaigner, which I love to like go for it. And it says the 3 traits that describe them: enthusiastic, creative, and sociable. I don't know how creative I am, but I think I'm pretty enthusiastic and sociable. And if you start reading some of these others, they are not me. My husband, who is actually sitting over there while I'm doing this and being really nice, he is an ISTJ, right? Aren't you an ISTJ? He's pretending to ignore me. He is. Yeah, he knows. He's an ISTJ. And if you read ISTJ and you've heard me talk about Neil, like this is him, it says it's the logician. I didn't even know that was a word. Thinking they should just say logic. And it says practical, fact-minded, and reliable. Is that you? Would it be better if he came over here and got in the video and showed y'all? He says no. He exists, I promise. So anyways, like they are dead on. Like those 3 words absolutely describe me, and those 3 words absolutely describe him. So I'll try and put some things up so that you can like take these because they're super interesting. There's so many websites you can go read about them. I mean, it's like falling into a rabbit hole with like your zodiac signs, and you get to the end, you're like, oh my God, that's so me. But this really is very accurate on people, and it's pretty easy to like find things to take online. You can take abridged versions that aren't 126 questions, and yeah, we did it in Honor Psych if you did it, and it most of the time. Now, I guess it's not always, or maybe people didn't answer them right or didn't. You kind of have to do some calculations to get your letters, and maybe people didn't calculate them right. But usually, I mean, they are dead on. So it asks questions and labels test takers on things such as like I said, it's either F or T for like the third one, which would be like feeling or thinking. So feeling is like sympathetic, whereas thinking is more like analyzing. And it's like, what are you better at? Like feeling the person out or just kind of doing the more black or white, right or wrong type thing. Then you got something called the Keirsey Temperament Sorter. It was by a guy named David Keirsey. I don't think they talk about this in your book, but I added it because it's pretty important. It's similar to the MBTI, similar to the Myers-Briggs, but it's smaller, it's more abridged. And what they do is they take these 16 things and like, let's say this column, this one, and this one are like this row, this row, this row, this row, however they do it. And they have like 4 main things. I can't remember what they are. But again, I can put that up, maybe like the activist or the this or that. And then it's like the 4 types that are under this, the 4 types under that, and the 4 types under that, and the 4 types under that. So it almost like groups them even more. So yeah, and they have this book called Please Understand Me. I have this book at school. It gives you like pages and pages of descriptions on each type, which is really interesting. So when I was in AP Psychology, I think in my head it was that David Keirsey guy, but I don't know like if it was or not, but someone legitimate came to the Career Center, and like we went to the Career Center one night and we sat there and like took the legitimate test, like not just like an internet version, like it was like a very sterile environment. And we did it in the Career Center library. And that was when the Career Centers were for SciTech is. They might not even have a library now, but we sat there and did it. And the guy, they analyzed us right there and gave us our stuff. And that was when I got that ENFP that I was telling you about. And I got this book and all this stuff. So in my head, like I said, it was the author and the guy who came up with it. It could have just been someone, but it was where I became familiar with the Myers-Briggs because it was a smaller version. So we might do something more like that, but it's what gave me that. And pretty much has been the same way I've been since I was in high school, same way I am now. I mean, a lot different, obviously, but like the core things, like I'm still just as sociable or enthusiastic. So things that are core about you, like right now, like I talk about Neil being this, like he was pretty reliable in high school. He was pretty fact-minded. Like he was a math guy. like things that are core about you right now will tend to still be core about you when you're an adult. Just kind of other things around it and the way you handle it will be what shifts. So I'll put up some links on that for after the exam and you don't have to do it, but like I said, it's pretty fun if you're interested. And like I said, most people agree with it. And it even tells you like career paths that best suit you. Like, yeah, teaching is a really good career path for someone who's enthusiastic and sociable. Have you had teachers who aren't enthusiastic or don't care or don't like to talk or aren't sociable? Like, oh, is that even fun, right? And, like banking is a really good career path for someone who's like practical and, analytical and all that stuff and reliable. So it tells you like career paths. It tells you the type of person that best suits your temperament, all kinds of stuff, relationships, friendships, stuff like that. It tells you how you handle stuff and how they do and like make stuff work. Is super cool. Anyways, I digress. Get back to the notes. So trait theories classify a person with a distinct personality type. And some people say, well, that fails to capture the full individual. Like that's saying all of us who are ENFPs, which is like super common. It's like a huge part of the population. I'm like not unique at all, according to them. It's like 10 or 12% of the population. And they're like, really 10 or 12% of the population is like exactly like, no. So it says like we're all unique within that. And these, when they do this big like overarching thing, like it fails to look at like your personal stuff, like your uniqueness and stuff. So there's been even more things, and they use stuff like factor analysis to identify statistically correlated clusters of behavior. And so there's this one we're going to talk about called the MMPI in a minute, and it is more like data driven and stuff. So Hans and Sybil Eisnick, they believed that, and we talked about them. We talked about Hans Eisnick. I can't remember if it was development or therapy. It's late, sorry. Yeah. Anyways, so they basically it's a husband-wife combination, and they said, all right, so I think you can reduce it down to two things. If you were introverted, extroverted, and it's a spectrum, it's a scale from like 100% outgoing to 0% outgoing, so like really extroverted to really introverted, and then stable versus unstable. So they also want to look at emotional stability from like super emotional stable to not emotionally stable at all. And so basically, since you have like these two scales, these two spectrums, they did one this way and one this way to make like an axis, like in math. And it's like where you fall along this line, and then where you fall along this line. So if you fall like right here, you're more extroverted than introverted, and then you're more stable than unstable. You're like right there, and you'd be in like a quadrant. And so if you read these quadrants, like somebody who's stable but extroverted, they're sociable, outgoing, talkative, easygoing, lively, carefree. If you read like someone who's unstable and introverted and they're like, really quiet, they might be moody, anxious, sober, pessimistic, stuff like that. Someone who's quiet, but they are stable, they're passive, they're careful, they're thoughtful, they're peaceful, reliable. Someone who's unstable and like out there extroverted could be like restless, aggressive, excitable, impulsive, stuff like that. So here's your definition of personality inventories. Make sure you get those down. It's a questionnaire. Often they have true or false or agree, disagree, in which people respond to items designed to gauge a wide range of feelings, behaviors, and it's used to assess selected personality traits. So the MBTI does not do true, false, agree, disagree, but most of them actually do. The classic personality inventory is what we're about to talk about, the MMPI. Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, most widely researched and clinically used of all the personality tests today. It was originally developed to identify emotional disorders, and people still consider that that's what it's best at identifying and doing. But they also use it for many other screening purposes today. And there's like a video on it that you can watch. Test maker Stark Hathaway compared his work to that of Alfred Binet. He was trying to do what Binet did in Paris, when they were doing the schools, and Alfred Binet came up with the IQ test to see what levels kids were at and what kind of services and stuff they would need. He said he was doing the same thing with our personality. So he made it empirical, he made it data-driven with the factor analysis, kind of all that stat stuff that goes over my head that makes it real and valid. He did that. So that's why this is still considered such a good test today. It's empirically derived test, which means a test developed by testing a pool of items and then selecting those that discriminate between two groups of people. Personality inventories are scored objectively. So there's like a right or wrong. Or this means that type of personality and this means that. It's like 2 + 2 = 4. You know what I'm saying? It's very objective. Whereas the projective test I was talking about in an earlier video, like looking like the Rorschach one, like looking at the ink blots and telling me what you see, or the TAT test where you see a crazy picture and you tell a crazy story. I could tell a story, you could tell a story, she could, he could. Who's to say whose story is right or wrong? And they're like all totally different stories. That's subjective. Like it's up to the psychologist to make whatever of it. But like objective, you could score your own, like this is what I am type thing. So that's kind of the difference between the two tests. So from a large pool of items, which were hundreds of true or false questions, Hathaway selected those on which the diagnostic groups differed. And he got groups of people who had like depressive tendencies and people who didn't. He wanted like two groups of people kind of going head to head so he could see what questions made for different answers. So he knew those were the questions to put because based on your different answers, he could identify what was going on with you. He ended up making 10 clinical scales from it, things like masculinity versus femininity, extroversion versus introversion. He looked at depressive tendencies, stuff like that. And today it can be used to assess work attitudes, family problems, and anger issues in people. So definitely widely used today, the MMPI. Next up is something called the Big Five. So today's trait researchers believe that the simple traits like ISNCS are important, stable, unstable, extroverted, introverted. But they said like that doesn't paint the whole picture. Like two things, come on, you got to look into more things. They came up with 5 things. So basically they took his work and just expanded it and added 3 more things. And this is kind of the most active personality research. And so there's a video on that you can watch. So write this down into your notes. Everywhere else in the world, you'll hear it called ocean. Like if you Google Big Five, it says ocean. But for some reason, the Myers book makes the, they didn't even do it here. No, they did. I just can't read. They make the acronym CANOE. CANOE and ocean, all the same letters. I think if the whole world calls it ocean, like they should call it ocean, but they call it CANOE. But either way, just remember water when it comes to them. So again, it's 5 scales, okay? So think of all these lines as, like I said, a spectrum from like 100% to 0%. So the first one is conscientiousness. So like if you are 100% conscientious, you are organized, you are careful, you are disciplined. If you are 0% conscientious, you are disorganized, careless, and impulsive. Most people aren't 100% or 0%. They're somewhere in the middle, more this than that type thing. And so basically it's like you plot yourself on all of these 5 spectrums, and that's like your description, that's your score, that's your answer type thing. Then you got agreeableness. So 100% agreeable. And the weird thing is like 4 of these words are considered good or positive, and 1 word's considered bad or negative. I don't know why they did it that way. So it's like if you were plotting like a perfect person, it's like they'd be 100% conscientious, 100% agreeable, 0% neurotic, 100% open, 100% extroverted. See what I'm saying? So it's interesting. But anyways, so if you were 100% agreeable, you would be soft-hearted, trusting, and helpful. If you were 0% agreeable, you'd be ruthless, suspicious, and uncooperative. Neurotic, I don't know how to say it. Neuroticism? It's the word neurotic. I don't know, I messed it up. Y'all would tell me how to say it if we were in class. It's the whole emotional stability versus instability. So if you're neurotic, that's bad. So 100% this you can see are actually negative words, which negative words tend to be over there. These are positive words tend to be over here, but it's just, I don't know. So anyways, someone who is 100% neurotic is anxious, insecure, and self-pitying, while someone who is 0% neurotic's a fancy word for crazy, is calm, secure, and self-satisfied. All right, then you got openness. Someone who's 100% open is imaginative, variety, and independent. 0% would be practical, routine, and conforming. And then extroversion, which you could argue if extroverted is better than introverted. Most people tend to think it is, but if you're an introvert, you're probably going to say it's not. But for some reason, psychology looks at it like that. Is like sociable, fun-loving, and affectionate. If you were 100% extroverted, whereas if you were 0%, you'd be retiring, sober, and reserved. Yeah, make sure you have this in your notes about Big Five. Right, and then some of this is just kind of some fluff stuff. We're not going to be writing down, just kind of talking about it. So twin studies have shown that genes are very influential in temperament, counts for about 50%. So again, you have that whole nature-nurture debate and people saying, like, what makes your personality more? The genes and the parents and the genetics and heredity you have, or the environment you're in, your friends, your family, what school you go to, what time period, what place on the earth you live. And it appears to be about 50-50. There are correlations, this is interesting, with brain structure and personality. So people who rated higher on the conscientious scale, when they did brain structures and like brain scans and stuff, they had larger frontal lobes, which is where kind of conscientious stuff comes out because that's when you're planning, you're controlling your behavior, like that. It tends to predict behaviors cross-culturally. the Big Five does, and traits in general, because generally people do not lie when answering personality inventories. Like, they say how they really are because they want to know about themselves. Our personality is found to change somewhat throughout childhood and adolescence, but kind of once you get to adolescence, young adulthood, it's going to remain stable throughout adulthood. So who you are in your 20s is pretty much the same person you are in your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. But you might look back at your 8-year-old self and be like, whoa, I'm not like that at all. Or if you're like me, you get to your 30s and you look back on your teenage self and you're like, oh my God, who was that girl? You know, like, you're doing things that are like, never. So it's kind of funny, but like, to tell you that right now, because you're a teenager, like, you're not going to believe me. I know, because teenage me would not have believed a teacher saying that. But now that I'm 30, I can look back and be like, teenage me did not know it all, which is surprising to her. But yeah, so it influences, like, because it remains stable, it influences things like our interests, our careers, our relationships, and those things tend to stay the same. Like, things you're interested in, like, you don't usually just like hate them overnight. You know, it's like, it tends to be an interest of yours throughout life. Our personality can change, though, in certain situations. Even though it's pretty stable, like, we do adapt, obviously, to situations. You act different at church than you do around your friends, than you do around your parents, than you do in my class, than you do in your first period. Like, you act different in my first or fourth than you do in your other first or fourth. You know what I'm saying? Like, you act different in different situations. Where you're at, what's expected, what your role is, who are the people around you, what do you feed off of, like that type of stuff. Longitudinal studies have showed that personality traits rival things like socioeconomic status and cognitive ability as a predictor of big things in life, like our mortality rate, our divorce rate, our career success rate, which is pretty interesting. Like, your personality can help you make more money one day than how smart you are. And you've probably starting to notice that. Like, you can be the smartest person ever, but if you can't get along with people, understand how the real world works, like, you're not going to be that successful. And there's people who aren't that book smart, but they know how to, like, work it, and they end up being way more successful in relationships, in careers, whatever. You can also derive a person's temperament by looking at things like their music, and this goes in depth in your book. You should read about it. It's kind of cool. The preference, like the types of music they talk about, if you listen to like country, jazz, pop, it's like the type of person you are is kind of interesting. Looking at people's bedrooms, offices, their online spaces. And I thought online spaces is kind of weird, but it's like how you sit, how you talk, what you wear in your pictures and stuff. And it's like conveys the type of person you are. And like the way you write, your written communication, you can like discern people's personalities when you read, you know, how they write and that. So anyways, I'm gonna stop right there and I'll do another video. See you guys later. Bye.